Hi there everyone. Welcome to this week's video where we're going to discuss Plato's Apology. Now you might recall from last time whenever we discussed the Euthyphro dialogue some features of Socrates' background and current predicament. So Socrates is kind of a comical figure, according to Plato's depiction, because he's this old man who goes around the city and does what especially young men were characterized as doing. Looking for a teacher, looking for someone who can tell him the nature of wisdom or justice or courage or what have you, right? And Socrates would go around doing this, and in doing so, like in the situation with Euthyphro, he would reveal the person that he's trying to learn from to be ignorant, right? Socrates, because of his earnestness, because of his desire to learn from others, actually played this annoying function to other people of revealing how little they truly knew. Now, it was really only a matter of time until Socrates had made enough rich, powerful people angry enough that he would eventually get into a lot of trouble for it. You'll recall from the Euthyphro that Socrates mentions that he's hanging out by the Athenian courtroom because he is being charged with impiety, among other kinds of charges that we will discuss more in a moment. The Apology is the dialogue that comes immediately after the Euthyphro, and this is where this whole situation comes to a head. Socrates is tried, he's prosecuted by a sophist, which we'll have more to say about what a sophist is in a moment. And the Apology really depicts Socrates' self-defense speech, right? And so it's an apology not in the sense that Socrates is saying, I'm sorry, or something to that effect, but it's instead an apology more in the way of an explanation or a defense. Because we're going to see that Socrates actually is not sorry for philosophizing in public, and in fact is willing to put his own life in pretty mortal peril. So with that context in mind, let's get into it. Socrates' prosecutors claim that he has committed three primary offenses. They accuse him of corrupting the youth, of making the weaker arguments the stronger, so he's confusing people and the like, right? And he's impious, right? He rejects conventional religion and therefore the existence of the gods. Now, Socrates' efforts at rebutting these charges are largely going to hinge on his claim that philosophy is distinct from sophism. Sophism we can describe as basically the equivalent of lawyering nowadays. Sophists were people who went around the city in ancient Athens and elsewhere, and they claimed to be educators of the young, and they also claimed to have wisdom and be able to show, for example, how to make a young man ready to become a politician or a statesman, right? They shared their wisdom, which was often rhetorical tricks for making people listen to you and so on, and they charged a fee generally to do so. Socrates, in this dialogue generally, is going to assert that there's a fundamental difference between the sophist who claims to have knowledge, who charges people for that knowledge, and who doesn't really believe in the existence of the gods other than as a vehicle to persuade other people, Socrates is going to claim that as a philosopher, he's not claiming actually to have any unique, distinctive kind of wisdom. To the contrary, Socrates has his own distinctive kind of wisdom that he knows nothing. We're going to say more about this in just a moment. And so in contrast to the sophists, Socrates claims to have no wisdom. He's not trying to teach anyone, and he never has charged anyone a fee. He has no rhetorical skills or political power in the way that most sophists do. And in response to the charge that he is impious, Socrates claims that he has only followed the law of his own daimon. Nowadays, we would probably liken this to be something like Socrates' conscience, right? His conscience tells him that he has to pursue the truth no matter what. And to illustrate this distinction between sophism and philosophy, Socrates describes this journey wherein he was told by the oracle at Delphi that he was the wisest man in all of Athens. This, of course, is quite shocking to Socrates because Socrates claims to have no wisdom and so on, right? And so what does Socrates do? Well, he tries to investigate the claim made by the oracle at Delphi and to seek out wisdom or knowledge from other Athenians. So he goes to craftspeople, he goes to politicians, and he goes to artists, right? All three groups that are all said to have some sort of knowledge. What he finds is that, for example, the craftspeople think that they have knowledge, and they do have knowledge. They know how to make things, right? But they don't know what they know, or in other words, they don't understand the limits of their own knowledge. So they have wisdom, they have knowledge about technical matters. It's the ancient Greek word, techne, which means like a craft or a production, right? They know how to bend metal, or they know how to build a house, or how to make shoes, etc. But they think that they can extrapolate from this wisdom into general principles. So they take themselves to know more than they do. The situation of the poets is quite similar for Socrates, where he thinks that the poets were in fact divinely inspired whenever they wrote their great works of poetry. However, that they didn't really have any special knowledge of their own artistic works, right? Once again, they know how to create something, but they don't know in the end what it means. And the politicians for Socrates were the worst of all, in that they didn't really have any general knowledge whatsoever. However, they claimed to be in a position to rule over other people on the basis of that knowledge, which they don't have. And so having now diagnosed the Athenians, right, his fellow people, Socrates now asks, maybe the oracle at Delphi is right. But if the oracle at Delphi is right, then it must be that Socrates has a unique kind of wisdom, a kind of wisdom that's missing from the Athenians and who is missing from everyday people, generally speaking. And we'll go to our first quote here, which has Socrates saying, quote, "What has caused my reputation is none other than a certain kind of wisdom." What kind of wisdom? Human wisdom, perhaps. And we're going to see that this is specifically philosophical wisdom, right? So what does Socrates have that the others don't? For this, we're going to turn to number 2. How do we characterize that human wisdom that we had just discussed? Well, here he says, quote, "It is likely that neither of us, neither Socrates nor the people that he's interrogating, know anything worthwhile. But he, namely the person Socrates is interrogating, thinks he knows when he does not, whereas when I do not know, neither do I think that I know. In other words, I do not think I know what I do not know. So Socrates' wisdom, philosophical wisdom, is a knowledge or wisdom concerning his own ignorance, right? Whereas everyone else believes that they know more than they do, Socrates knows the exact limitations of his own knowledge. And so while the sophists and everyone else claim that they have all of this wisdom and indeed they can sell it to others, Socrates is not in a position to do that. And at one point, it really seems like Socrates is going to perhaps be successful. He is found guilty. However, there are indications given in the dialogue that he can get off with a relatively light sentence, a smack on the wrist if he will just agree not to do philosophy anymore. Now, what Socrates says in response to this was quite stunning to people. Is Socrates, proposing his own punishment, says, well, why don't you let me eat in this buffet for the Olympians every day, right? That should be my punishment, is that I should receive the highest celebration that you can give to any Athenian, right? So really they wanted Socrates at this moment to recoil, right, in the face of his potential punishment, namely execution, right, and to promise not to continue doing philosophy. Socrates refuses that and then spits in their face, essentially, saying, not only should I not be punished, but in fact you should celebrate me at, to the highest caliber, right? Obviously this doesn't take well, and so because Socrates does this, he is sentenced to death, right? And we're going to explore over the next couple of dialogues Socrates' last moments, right, before he is eventually put to death by the Athenian people. But Socrates, it's notable, does not fear death. He does not think that his execution is actually significant, right? He ultimately is going to believe that a bad person cannot hurt a good person. Now, that's a striking claim, given that bad people can, for example, kill good people, right? Which is seemingly exactly what's going on in this case. So it's going to take some explaining. And in this dialogue, Socrates expresses the view that his wisdom prevents him from fearing death, right? The fear of death, I think we could reasonably say, is one of the most universal human features. And Socrates claims in this moment not to fear death at all. And his reasoning is connected exactly to what he had previously called his human wisdom. Here I quote, "To fear death, gentlemen, is nothing other than to think oneself wise when one is not. To think that one knows what they do not know." So Socrates' basic point is this: we don't know what happens after death. Nobody has ever experienced that and then been able to go back and communicate it to mortal people. Consequently, he doesn't know if death is ultimately a good thing or a bad thing, right? We kind of naturally, right, hold on to our mortal lives, but Socrates doesn't think that this is a rational response, right? It's to think ourselves wise where we are not to go about fearing death. Consequently, what Socrates fears most of all is being in the position that he would be in if he took the bargain that the sophists essentially offered him and relented from doing philosophy, because he can know, as we see in quote 4, that the unexamined life is not worth living. So Socrates would rather die than stop doing philosophy. This dialogue is one of the most prolific and completely fascinating documents, really, in all of Western history, right? It's just fascinating, the character that Socrates portrays in this dialogue. And he's regularly taken to be a kind of real representative of what it means to do philosophy, generally speaking. And his courageousness in this dialogue is quite telling about what it means to do philosophy and what it means to be wise. Do you think that Socrates made the right decision? Do you agree with him that we shouldn't fear death? What about the fact that the unexamined life is not worth living? I very much look forward to hearing what you think, and I will see you in the next video.